Hello, my name is Chris Holland, and this is an introduction to my test-driven development Kata, which happens to be in PHP. So you can see my Twitter handle here. Feel free to follow me and reach out to me if you have any questions. So yes, we're going to look at test driving an API with the data mapper pattern and the data mapper ORM with repositories. So the Kata, there's a URL here that you can go to get instructions on getting set up to follow along for the Kata. And then the slides for this presentation are available here. So first, let's start with why did I put together this Kata. There are a lot of great TDD exercises out there. However, they're kind of difficult to apply to real-world applications with different architectural layers, dealing with a lot of data, for example. And there are some pretty good examples of test driving web applications, but they tend to be over-reliant on a specific MVC framework. And I do try to keep my code very decoupled from any kind of framework. I'm all about leveraging frameworks, but I will do whatever I can to keep my code decoupled from a framework. So the nice thing about this Kata is it's technically adaptable to almost any framework in almost any technology stack. And I've done it with Java and .NET. And another thing about this is it strives to embrace concepts of clean architecture. So I have a link to that there as well. So as I briefly mentioned, there are web applications tend to work a lot with data. And this is kind of a recurring pain point when trying to test drive our business logic. Our business logic does do a lot with data, and the nice thing about this workflow is that it's going to show you how you can test drive your business logic, which interacts with your data layer. So in this Kata, we're going to test drive a RESTful API, and we're going to do what we can to play to our ORM strengths. In this case, we're going to use Doctrine in PHP. So the goals here are to solve business problems in the test harness, and for the manual testing to only be used for sanity checking. Right? We should barely be doing any kind of manual testing, at least for the API. And the goal of all this is to arrive at a faster workflow, right? So we can stimulate our code without having to bootstrap a UI in front of our API, and without having to constantly interact with the REST client, which will result in a lot less time clicking around. And we're going to spend very little time interacting with the database, which would be like a MySQL database. We're pretty much not going to connect to it, aside from just to sanity check some things. All right, so what you will see in this Kata is that we will not be making tables manually, right? We won't be making tables with columns and foreign keys manually. We will also not be inspecting our records, our database records, to verify the behavior. We're going to leverage our ORM to do a lot of that heavy lifting, to automatically generate migrations to create tables with proper columns and foreign keys based on our entity graph. So as far as tooling goes, we're going to use PHP Unit, which is a unit testing framework which conforms to the XUnit standard. And then Codeception. Codeception is a test framework which allows you to do acceptance tests with actual HTTP requests to the API that we're going to build. So we will be operating within a TDD-friendly architecture, which is going to look a little bit like this. So in this Kata, we're not going to be creating any commands. But as the complexity of the logic tends to increase, it's a good idea to add a command layer. But you can see your service classes as kind of high-level business logic. They could almost be the RESTful endpoints into your business logic. Your repository classes are going to do much of your data operations, and repositories will be responsible for creating entities and retrieving entities from the data store. I try not to expose entities to anything above commands. I try to just expose DTOs. DTOs are just data transfer objects, and so whenever a controller or a view needs some data, I tend to transpose any kind of entity that I have in the scope of a command or even in the scope of a service into a DTO, which is a much more lightweight data object which does not have any behavior. It's literally just a data structure. And so everything in the green zone will be test driven at the unit level. Everything in the yellow zone, what we'll do is we won't be doing views in this instance because we're building an API. So we will just be using controllers which spit out JSON data basically. And so we will test drive the controllers with codeception acceptance tests. So I'm not going to test drive the controllers at the unit level. I will test drive the controllers at the acceptance layer where we will actually be doing HTTP requests into the controllers. And then those acceptance tests will have to make sure that the actual MySQL database is actually properly bootstrapped, and we're going to explore what that means a little bit later. Okay, so let's dive into what it will look like to test drive the data layer with repositories and entities. So on one hand, we'll have our unit tests. And then on the other hand, we will have manual testing, which is actually going to be using a MySQL database. So in our application, we're going to leverage an ORM, which is going to be a data mapper ORM, which is called Doctrine PHP. And this ORM is going to be bootstrapped with an in-memory database. It's going to be configured with an in-memory database in the unit test harness. And as far as manual testing goes, it's going to be configured with a MySQL database. But the nice thing is that our code is not going to change based on what the ORM happens to be bootstrapped with. So in PHP, we're going to use an XUnit test harness, and then we're going to write unit tests, which are going to, in these unit tests, we're going to test drive production code, which is going to leverage our ORM, which is going to be backed by the in-memory database. That's kind of a more detailed visual representation of what I just explained. So with PHP, the in-memory database will be SQLite, the ORM will be Doctrine, and the test harness is going to be PHP unit. So I mentioned that this workflow should be applicable to other stacks, and so I've tinkered around in Java with the exact same workflow, and I've used HSQLDB, Hibernate, and JUnit. And then from the research that I've done for C# and .NET, this should be achievable with SQLCE. For the ORM, you could use nhibernate, but lately I've been playing around with Entity Framework, and I'm really impressed with it. So I would almost recommend just going with Entity Framework. And then NUnit was kind of the original C# test framework, but these days people are using a framework called XUnit, which is the same name as the standard XUnit. It's pretty confusing, but anyway, doesn't really matter. The point is it's all feasible. So what are we looking to build? This is roughly what we're trying to build. So we want to arrive at the ability to create a ride with a passenger, driver, departure, or destination. But to arrive there, we'll have to know how to create users and assign roles to users. And we'll also need to know how to create locations for a departure and a destination. Once we have that, then a ride can transition through different states, and we will want to kind of create events for that. So that you have requested, accepted, in progress, canceled, completed, rejected, expired. So that's some of the universe of things that we could do as part of this kata. As far as the recording goes, we're only going to go in this kind of bottom half. We're just going to go up to creating a ride with all of these things. Okay. So now that I showed you how we're going to bootstrap things to be able to test drive repositories and entities, now I'm going to show you what the workflow could look like. So as I mentioned, we want to arrive at a ride which will have a passenger and a departure. Right? For a ride to exist, it must have at the very least a passenger and a departure location. Right, so these things, if you think of objects, passenger and departure should really be part of the constructor of a ride. Okay, so once we have a passenger and departure, at least the ride can exist. And then at some point during the user using our application, they might assign a destination, and then a driver might pick up the ride. Okay, so if you look at passenger and driver, these concepts are actually a concept of a user with a role attached to it, right? A user with the role passenger attached to it, and then a user with the role driver attached to it. And if you look at departure and destination, these concepts are really a location. So the strategy that we're going to employ is we're going to start with the, if you look at what's on the screen kind of as a tree, sort of, right? We're going to start with the leaves of the tree, right? The things that are at the bottom of the screen. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll test drive production code to create a user and then to assign a role to a user. Then we'll test drive production code to create a location in the system, right? So if I want to create a departure, that's going to be a new location. If I want to create a destination, that's going to be a new location. So now that we have the ability to create, we technically have the ability to create all of these concepts, then we'll test drive code to create a ride. And as I mentioned earlier, a ride must exist with a departure and a passenger at the very least, right? So we're going to test drive these three things all together. So once we have the ability to create a ride with a passenger and departure, the next thing we'll do is we will test drive the ability to assign a driver to a ride. And then we will test drive the ability to assign a destination to a ride. Okay. So this sequencing is useful because what we're trying to do here is test drive a pretty complex entity graph. And these concepts are going to live in the data store. And in our test harness, they're going to live in our in-memory data store. And so part of the goal here is that, well, first let me just kind of work through the scenario here. So as I mentioned, we're going to first test drive production code to create a user. And then we'll test drive production code to create a passenger. But to create a passenger, I need to first get a user, right? And we just did that. So I'm going to call the production code that I just wrote in the previous test to create a user. I'm going to call that so that I can retrieve a user. And then I can finally test drive the production code to assign a role to the user. Okay. Then I can test drive production code to create a location. That does not depend on any other entity, so I can just kind of test drive that alone. All right, so now that we have all those things, it's time to test drive production code to create a ride. But like I said, for the ride to exist, it needs to have a passenger and a departure. Where can I get a passenger and a departure? Well, I just wrote code in my previous test to do just that. So I'm going to call production code that I previously wrote to create a passenger. So now I have a handle to a passenger that is in my in-memory data store. And then I can call production code to create a departure. A departure is really just a location object, which again, I did that in my previous test on the previous slide. So now I have a handle to a passenger and a departure, which allows me now to actually test drive my production code to assign this passenger and this departure to the ride that I'm trying to create. Okay, so now once this test is done, I have the ability to have a ride with a passenger and a departure. So then the next test that I want to do is the ability to assign a driver to a ride. Okay, but before I can assign a driver to a ride, I want to get a ride which already has a passenger and departure. Well, guess what? I just did that in the previous slide. So I'm going to call this production code to get my ride with passenger and departure. And then once I have that, then I will be able to test drive the production code to assign a driver to a ride. Okay, and then the next thing I want to do is to test drive production code to assign destination to a ride. So to do that, I'm going to call what I ended up with here, right? I'm going to call my production code to get a ride with passenger, departure, and driver, which then allows me to assign a destination to this ride, which is the last missing piece. Okay, so visually it kind of looks like this. Your first test may be called test create and save user, which allows you to create production code called new user and then get by ID. So that's going to be a repository methods called new user and get by ID. So then the next test we want to write is how to assign a role to a user. But to assign a role to a user, I'm going to need a user. Well, I just did that. So I just wrote production code to create a new user. So I'm going to invoke that, which then will allow me to create production code, to test drive production code, which will assign a role to a user. Okay. So then I'll test drive some code to create a location. So that's going to be my new location production code. And then I want to test create a new ride. But to create a new ride, I'm going to need a passenger, which I can get from this code, from here, and then a pickup location, which I can get from here. And now I can write the production code to create a new ride. So that's the general workflow. So this was the workflow for specifically test driving repositories. Because you're dealing with a complex entity graph, we need to make sure that those entities exist in the data store. And instead of just seeding the data store with just a big old data dump, I'm just incrementally leveraging methods that I created in previous tests and in previous production code to manifest these concepts into the data store. So the overall TDD workflow becomes pretty simple. I'm going to test drive my business logic, which is going to be made of entities, repositories, and services. And I'm going to do this in rapid iterations. So then what's really cool when working with a good data mapper ORM, such as Doctrine or Hibernate or Entity Framework or NHibernate, they all have a way to auto-generate migrations from the entity graph. So they will look at all of your entities, and then they will look at your MySQL connection or your SQL Server connection, and it will realize that, hey, you're missing a bunch of tables on there. So it will automatically generate migration files which will bring your local MySQL database in synchronization with your entire entity graph at the time that you ran the script. So once you have that, then you've created your migrations, you've run them, and you end up with a fully populated database schema, which now allows you to create your UI, your routes, and your controllers, which then allows you to do some manual testing. Okay. So then I would ask, but I hate testing manually, especially for an API, right? If I'm building a full user interface, then yes, I definitely want to test things manually. I want to make sure that my UI is good. But if I'm just building an API, I definitely want to automate things as much as possible. So this is why I like to test drive my controllers with acceptance tests. So I don't test drive my controllers at the unit level, and here's why. For one, they're thin and they're mostly devoid of logic, and all of the logic pretty much lives in architectural layers that are below the controller. So this gives me a great opportunity to test drive my whole integration. So what I will do is, before writing a single line of controller code, I will write an acceptance test. And the acceptance test will create an actual HTTP request to my host, which is going to interact directly with my MySQL database. So in the process, so as soon as I write my acceptance test, I will be writing my controller, which will invoke my service or command. I will be adding URI kind of route mappings. And then that will also force me to do this whole setup of auto-generating my database migrations by using my ORM and actually executing them, right? So once I have done all those three things, I know that the acceptance test that I wrote will pass. And so if you look at our previous workflow that we just looked at, right, we're going to make this whole bottom part go away, boom, and then what we'll do is we'll just kind of start with an acceptance test, which then will drive me to create my UI, my routes, my controller. In this case, Kata, we're not going to do a UI, but so it will make me create my routes and my controller, which will invoke my services. And then it will motivate me to auto-generate those migrations and run them. And that will be done through the ORM. Right, so I end up with the same end result, but I'm starting from the acceptance test and I'm not doing things manually. Right, so now I have verified that my entire application stack is fully bootstrapped correctly, and that my controller does what I expect it to do. And the nice thing is I can just keep running those acceptance tests forever, and it will have my back. So. Another high-level view of this TDD workflow is kind of like this. First, I test drive my repos, then I test drive my service, and I repeat it over and over. In the meantime, somebody else could be building my user interface concurrently while I keep building my repos and services. And then as things get closer to complete, we can start mapping URI routes, generate the SQL migrations, run them, and then test the application through the UI. But so the nice thing about all of this is that technically there are two zones here, zone 1 and zone 2. You got your your API layer, and then you have kind of the what consumes your API. And these two zones are decoupled, and you can work on them independently, right? So I don't need to have what's in zone 2 to complete zone 1, and I don't really need to have what's in zone 1 to complete zone 2. So, all right. So that's about it. Let's get started. Thank you.
Let's lay down some acceptance tests. So the first thing we're going to do is send a post API request to a URI called register user, and we're just going to pass an associated array that'll be first name, Chris, last name, Holland, and what we'll want to see then is I can see response contains JSON. So basically we create a user and we want to return that user as an object. Okay. We'll just want to extract a response from this, and then we're going to extract the ID of the user from the response of ID. So the next thing we'll do is assign a role to the user. So I'm just kind of pasting some stuff I had in there before. User ID. Okay, cool. For now, I'm going to comment this out. It'll be something that looks like this. Passenger. That's because in my acceptance test, I like to use the concepts that are in my application domain. That's one nice thing of being able to leverage Codeception in your code base. Okay, so driver name, be driver. So here, that will be passenger. That will be driver. Okay, so this test suite right now is right here, and it's not going to pass because I don't have any of those endpoints right now. So, see, we expected a 200 and we got a 404. Well, that's because this endpoint doesn't exist yet, which is fine. We're going to create it later. I just wanted to lay those acceptance tests first so we know what we're building toward. And now we're going to go down to test drive the application. Okay, so now we're going to create a user repository to create a new user. So first we're going to do the test. So it'll be user repository test. Okay, test create new user. So we're going to create a new instance of an app user to which we're going to pass a the last name, and then we're going to say user repo equals new user repository to which we're going to pass the extends access case. Okay. Right, to which we're going to pass our entity manager. There we go. And then we'll say user repo save user or new user. Retrieve the user to make sure that we got it fine. Yeah, I'll just say by the okay. We could say that assert true that the retrieved user is the new user. There we go. So we're doing a whole lot of things in this test. It should work out fine. Okay, so obviously now if I go back to my test suite here, it's going to fail because things don't exist. User repository class doesn't exist. Okay, and then, so first, let's add a constructor. So it's going to be a string first, and then string last. Okay, and then let's just initialize those fields. Boom. Okay. All right, so at least this is happy. Now, let's make the one thing we want to say is that we'll just want to say that assert true that the retrieved user is named Holland. Okay. There are a bunch of ways we can do this, but it should be fine. All right, so now so my test still fails because I don't have that user repository class. That's fine. So now we're going to create it. We're going to put it in our source directory. Test. Boom. We're going to go back to source app bundle repository. So we're going to put it here. Okay. So the namespace here is wrong. So we're going to have it extend app repository, which is a convenience-based class that I created, but it should be namespace app bundle repository. Yeah, like that. Okay. And that's the basic repository. Okay, so now that we created it, we're just going to import it here. All right, now if I run the tab, say user does not exist. Okay, so we'll make it exist. And for now, I'm basically going to call the parent save convenience method that I created, and that's pretty much it. It does a persist and a flush of the object. All right, so the thing though is if I'm saving this down here, I'm going to make sure that their first name and last name does get saved. So if you look at my entity here, I had already created it, so at least I had this ID that was already done, but I did add two properties, first and last name. So I just need to make sure that the entity manager knows what to do with them. So I can do column name equals first, type equals string, nullable equals false. And then on this one, I'll do add column, name equals last, type equals string, nullable equals false. Okay. All right. So now I want to be able to retrieve my user by ID right here. Okay. So I'm going to add the method here. So by ID is going to be a UUID. First, let me create that getID method on my user object, and I'm just going to return this ID. Okay, so I have the ID property here that's defined as a UUID. Okay, so I'm just going to return this. So here I can just put the return type, which is UUID. So my byID method is going to take a UUID as a parameter. So from here, I can say return this em create query. It's going to be a get single result, and I'm going to set the parameter. Yeah, set parameter key ID, the user ID that I just passed, and get single result can. All right, so my query is going to look at this. It's going to be U from E app user U, where value.id equals the past ID. Yeah, that's fine. On by ID, I'm going to signal that it returns an app user object. Oh, yeah. Wait, so alright, for some reason it didn't detect the type here, even though I specified it here, which is strange. Anyway, let's move on. So my test is still going to fail because is name does not exist, so I can, run this, and here you go. So I'm going to add a method, is name, name to check, and I'll say return name to check is the same as Okay, let's see if that works. Okay, that works. And then is I'm basically just going to compare the user ID. So a nice thing is the user ID is a UUID, and there's a method to compare equality. So I'm going to say return. So it's going to be user to test. So return user to test ID equals this ID. Okay. Okay, here we go. Now I can create a user, save it, and retrieve it by ID. Okay, so now that we have a repository, let's just make a service. User service test. And I'm going to extend app test case. Alright, and I'm going to say test register new user. And I'll just say user service equals new a user service to which I'm going to pass a new user repository to which I'm going to pass the entity manager. Okay, so once I have that, I just want to say user service register a new user just by first and last name for now. That's it. Chris Holland. And then I'll just want to say that retrieved user. So when I register the user, I want to return it. So saved user equals user service register. And then the retrieved user will just be user service by ID of the same ID of my saved user. And then I can just say assert true retrieved user is saved user. And that should be enough. Alright, so let's start. I'm going to create the class. I'm going to put it in my source directory up here. Source. I don't have a service folder, so I'm just going to create it. New folder, service. I hit it when source app bundle. I want to move this guy here under app bundle. There we go. Okay, so let's try this again. Move it down to source service. Okay. All right. So this is going to be app bundle. Oh crap. Service. Okay. I'm going to move it to the right side. Okay. Import class. crying out loud. Okay. All right. So now at least I can create a new user service. So if I run the test, it's still going to fail because register does not exist. So let's make it exist. Add method, boom. First, last. And I'm going to say new user equals new app user of first and last. And then I'll say, and I'm going to return this user repository, save my new user. No, save user of my new user. Oh, so the thing is, my save user method does not return anything. So we're going to make it return our new user. Okay, so we save it and then we return it. So then I can return it here, and I can just say that this returns an app user. Okay, so now this passes. Now let's make by ID work. And I'll simply delegate that to my repository. So I'll just go return this user repository by ID of the ID. And return this will return the exception. So now this test should pass. Yeah, it does. So now that I can register any user through the service, I'm going to bubble that up to the controller layer. So this is where I'm going to test drive my controller through my acceptance tests. So if we go back to this test here, so see new user created, send post API request to register user, and then verify that we get this here. In fact, I'm going to make those properties shorter. First, last, first, last. Okay. All right. So if I run my acceptance test, I'm going to not be happy because my endpoint doesn't exist, right? First, let me fix my parameters on that. Okay. So let's make the controller exist. So here I have my controller folder. I'm going to do new class user controller. And I'm going to extend app controller, which is again a convenience class that I made, which has different things that will be useful to me. So I'm using Friends of Symfony REST bundle. Create that. Controller. Yeah, that's basically the syntax. Okay, so that's the controller logic to make that endpoint exist, right? If I say comment this out, I'll just leave it. Okay. So user here, this is just a method that will return my user service. It's kind of a convenient method. So I'll put it in the base class app controller. And I'll just say ticket function user, which returns a user service. Return the new user service, to which I pass a new user repository, to which I pass my entity manager. The method I only called it register. So this is my user service. So this is the user service class with the register method that we created earlier, and I'm just invoking it from the controller. Okay, so user controller, register user post, register. Okay. Okay, so we're going to create a toDTO method on our app user entity. So this is app user, and we're going to return a user DTO. So it's a simple data transfer object. I'm going to do return new user DTO, to which we're going to pass our user ID, but it's a UID object, so it's better if we give it like a two-string representation. Then we'll just pass the first name, and then the last name. So this is inside app user. So we're going to create the DTO class. We're going to create class. Right now we are inside entity. We're going to create like a DTO folder. App bundle, new folder, DTO. Okay, so we're app bundle DTO. That's good. And then we'll just initialize those fields. We're going to return the DTO through the API endpoint here, and it's going to get serialized into a JSON object, even with the private properties. So technically, we don't need to do anything else here. Okay, so now I have a user controller, which calls the user service register method. And that register method, if you remember, it returns an app user entity. But I never want to return, I prefer to not return an entire entity to the API. So that's why I use a DTO object, which is why we just created a toDTO method on app user. So now if I run my test, it's still going to fail. It fails for a very good reason. I know what it is, but I will show it to you. So if you look at output, an exception occurred while executing insert into users, blah, 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 with params, all of this, right? So it tried base table or view not found. Table Symfony run 13 users does not exist. Yes. Well, that's because we don't even have a database, right? So earlier on, as part of the setup instructions, we created a blank database called Symfony run 13. That's it, right? Now, I don't have a users table in there, okay? But the nice thing is I do have my entity called app user, and this is where the magic of Doctrine comes in. Here I can go bin console, is it migration, Doctrine migrations diff. So it looks at my entities, and then it looks at my local database connection, and it creates a file that will be the necessary migrations to bring my local database to the state that's needed. So now if I look here, boom, it created everything that I need for me. This is a migration file. So these OAuth tables, these are mapped to entities that I had in the base project. Access token, auth code, client refresh token, which we're not going to use in the scope of this workshop, but they're there. But what matters here is this users table here, right? Create table users, ID, first, last. Boom. So it did all that for me. Okay. I'm going to add this file to my version control. Now that I have it, all I have to do now is call Doctrine migrations migrate. And it's just going to run the migrations. So now, if I refresh my database, I'm going to see some tables. Ta-da, boom. So I got my migrations versions. These are my OAuth tables. And here's our users table with ID, first, and last. Now, let's see what happens when I run my test. I think it's going to pass. Okay, so let's go back to the test. I'm going to comment out these tests for now. Okay, all right. No, I got a 500 error. Okay, well, let's find out why. For namespace entity. Okay. My user controller. That's why. Yeah, I just had the wrong imports, the wrong use statement. So let's run it again. Okay, I got another error. Wait, no. I did the same mistake again. Why is it not finding my user DTO from the right place? Because I had the wrong namespace here. That's why. Chivas. Okay. Well, that was fun. Let's hope it works now. No. Seriously? Okay, app bundle DTO, user DTO. Right. Again, that's because I was using the wrong import. Let's see if it works now. Wow. Okay. DTO is driver does not exist. I'm not using a property yet. Bin console cache clear. All right, it passes. Yeah, the old cache problem. All right, get rid of these error files. Okay. So it passes. I send a user. I verify that what was returned had the correct payload in there. Okay, so next we want to assign a role to a user. So we'll go back to our user repository test. And we're going to say public function test assign passenger role to user. The first thing that we'll want is to have a new user, create a new user, and save that user to our data store such that we can act on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to refactor this chunk here to get me a new user. Get repo new user. So all of that was moved to a utility method here. New user equals this get repo new user. And then I want to say new user assign role of a new concept which we're going to introduce, which is an app role passenger. Then we want to call our, so we'll need our user repository as well, which is here. So I'm going to extract this into a field. And then I'm going to move this initialization to a setup method. Parent setup. Okay, so then I'm going to say this user repo, save user, my new user. So then I want to retrieve the user. By ID, using the same ID. And I want to assert true that my retrieved user has role of app role passenger. I want to say that at this time they are not a driver. So I'm going to say that. So assert false. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is okay, we'll do it in a little bit. So I'll go back to my test suite. It should fail, obviously, because all these things don't exist. So, okay, first thing we need to do is to assign a role. All right, so first what I'm going to do is create that app role class. Entity. And so it's app bundle entity. I can move it here. I'm going to create the method. Yeah, I'm just going to build it out here. Self passenger ID and self passenger name. So I'll pass in a passenger ID and a string. That's the role name, basically. Then I'll just initialize those fields. It's going to be ID1, and this is going to be passenger. While I'm here, I might as well make driver. Okay, so this needs to be an entity. So it's going to be a column, name equals ID, type equals integer, model equals false. There's going to be a column of name, type string, model equals false. Okay. So now I'm going to see if I can assign a role. Okay, so now what I want to do is assign a role. So we're inside the app user entity, and we're going to give it a role that we want to pass. So, okay, so roles is going to be an array collection. So array collection has a method called add. So a user can have multiple roles. So it's going to be a many-to-many relationship. Add it here. So if I'm doing this, if I define my roles bar member here, I should initialize it. If I run my test now, yes. So I have an ID here, but I haven't flagged it as a, so I'll just go at ID. Okay, so this error should go away. Should get a different error now. So has role does not exist. Okay. So the role that I'm passing is role to check. It's an instance of this app role class, and I want to see that. So basically, the property roles is going to be a collection of instances of this class. And basically what I got to do is iterate through those instances and see that the ID of the role to check matches the IDs of the instances that are stored. So thankfully, array collection gives us a way to do this. Is just kind of a pain to memorize. So what I do is this. This is role to check. I don't have a get ID on this yet. So I don't have a get ID on app role. So I just need to expose it. So I'm going to return this ID. Okay, let's run the test now. This test should fail. And the reason it fails is because I have an array collection here, but I don't have the many-to-many database mapping that I need to make this happen. So, okay, so I'm defining a many-to-many relationship on the entity app role against the app user. It's going to be using a join table called users roles. It's going to have these join columns, user ID references ID, and then role ID references ID. Good. So now, what I did here is I assigned a new instance of app role to my user entity. But app role, but passenger, this instance did not exist in the data store first. So that's kind of why I gotta go this save. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put myself a to-do, add these roles to migration. App role of driver. So now at least these roles exist in the database. And the thing is, this assignment is still not going to work. You know, if I run this, it's still not going to work because it's still a new instance, right? I basically need to, whatever I just saved to the database up here, I need to retrieve it down here. So we're going to make a method on user repository called, so we'll say this user repo get role reference, to which I'm going to pass an instance of passenger. Given an instance of the role to get, I'm just going to retrieve an entity coming straight from the database. All right, so it'll look like this. Return, create query. So then we'll set parameter of role to get. We'll get a single result. And it'll be select R from E, app role R, where R equals the past role. And behind the scenes, they'll just compare the ID. And so that's going to return the app role. All right. So this should make a test pass. Yep. So now we can assign a role. Okay, well, earlier QuickTime crashed, and so you did not get to see me type all this stuff. So here it is. So now that we knew how to assign a role at the repository layer, remember, like test assign passenger role to user. Now we're going to flip back to the service, and we're going to test assign role to user at the service layer. So here I just grab a new user using the same functionality that I had up here, because I do need a user that exists in the data store. So once I have that, I call a method called assign role to user, to which I pass the user and the role to assign. Then I retrieve the user again from the database. Then I will assert true that this user has a role of passenger, because that's what I did the assignment for. And then assert false that this user has a role of driver. But then I'm going to go in and assign a role to user of driver, right? So now the user is going to have both roles, passenger and driver. And then I retrieve the user, and then I'm going to assert true that the retrieved user has role of driver and passenger. So that was the test. Now I'm going to create the production code, assign role to user. This is the past user. This is the past role. What I'm going to do is user assign role, because remember I had the assign role on my user entity, to the past role. And then I'm going to say this user repository, save user. Now, remember back when we did the user repository test, we did identify that we needed to obtain a reference to the role, right? You know, we did new user, okay, and then we did user assign role, and then we're calling, you know, get role reference of app role passenger. We want to make sure that we do that here, right? So it's this user repository, get role reference, and then we just pass the role. That just may be enough to make our test pass. Let's see. Run the tests. Right. So what's happening here is my get role reference returns nothing, right? So we passed the passenger role, and then they try to get it and it does not exist. That's because, if you remember, in my user repository test, those to-dos that I had created here, so these roles are only being saved in the database only within the scope of that test. Now I want to make sure that these get saved within the scope of all the tests. So I'm going to cut it, and I'm going to move it into the parent app test case. Let's see if that fixes it. So now when I go to my user service test, when this test runs, it's going to call the setup, which is going to call parent setup, which is going to save those roles. So by the time that I come around and I assign role to user, and I'm trying to get the role reference, well, now it should exist. Let's see. Yeah, all right. Okay, so now that we're able to do it, we're able to assign a role, any role, to the user from the service layer. Let's go up to the controller. So to test the controller, we're going to go back to our user acceptance test. So earlier we were able to send a post API request to create a new user and then verify that we get that user back. So now I uncommented those tests after that, and this is where we're going to issue a patch API request to a user endpoint with the user ID, where we'll just change the role of where we will assign a role to the user of passenger. Same here. And then we'll do the same thing and then give them the driver role as well. And so once that's done, they basically should have both roles. So by the end of this test, we'll have created a new user, and we'll have assigned that user to the role of passenger, and then we will have added the role of driver, and then we end up with a user who has both roles. So that's the acceptance test. So if I go back to my acceptance test, we'll see that they fail simply because my web server is not running. Yeah, so that bin console server run. So let's try that again. Okay, so basically our acceptance test passes all the way to here, and then when it sends the patch request here, it fails. It gets to 200. That's because that endpoint doesn't exist. So let's go to the user controller. We'll do like public function patch user, and we'll just return. So we'll call user assign role to user, and then assign role to user does not currently return a user, so we'll make it do so. Assign role to user takes two arguments, a user and a role. So we'll have to figure out. So this is going to be a REST patch, and then the URI is going to be API v1 user, and then it's like that, I think. So user to patch is going to be this user by ID, so it'll be string user ID. So this user ID matches this. Okay. I have a convenience method in the base controller called ID, which returns a UUID object from a user ID string, because the user service by ID takes a UUID as an argument. Role to assign equals request get, I think it'll be role. What did I call it? Yeah, I called it role. This is like role string to assign. So role to assign is going to be, I'm going to create a convenience method called appRole from name, role string to assign. Okay. So then I'll pass user to patch and then role to assign. So I'll go to this add method. Alright, so there's no super elegant way to do this, but I'll say return self passenger else if okay, so that should do it, at least from a bootstrapping standpoint. But we're going to see that we're going to have an error. So I get a 500, and if I look at my output, it'll complain that the database is not ready. Base table, view not found, Symfony, roles. Yeah, my roles table does not exist. So yeah, we just need to do another round of doctrine def. Add it to the version control, and here you go. So this will do my migration. Now, here's the thing. If you remember my to-do earlier, if I go back to my app test case, in the setup method, remember how I said to do add these roles to migration? Now would be a good time to do it. So I could say this, add SQL, insert into roles, ID, name, app role, passenger name. So insert into roles, ID, name, value, 1, passenger, 2, driver name. See if it works. So now I modified my migrations file. That's fine. I'm ready to run my migrations. So I'm going to go bin, console, doctrine, migrations, migrate. Let's hope it works. An exception occur while executing insert into roles. I need 1 passenger. I gotta do this, I think. Right. So I'm just gonna comment this out just so that my inserts can execute in peace. Okay. Well, that was hackish, but usually I will add these roles manually. I'll just get it in SQL Pro just for the sake of the demo, but it's always more robust to have it part of the migration. And we did just that, so that's nice. Okay, so let's see if our test will pass now. So let's go back to the test, delete that, and I'm going to rerun my test. Hey. Now we can assign roles to the user. Boom. And we verified all the way to the acceptance layer, so with the controllers. So now I can look at my database if I want to. I can look at, this is my main database. I can go to Symfony run 13. Okay. So that's the database that we've created for this exercise. And every time I've run my acceptance tests, you can see that a user gets created. And you can see the user and role assignment maps, right? So if I run my test again, you have 2. It's nice. I refresh. Boom. Now I got 4. Another user got created, and roles got assigned to it. Okay, so it looks like there is something weird happening with the code section integration with PHP Storm, because it's kind of masking some failing tests here. So if I go, I can see response contains JSON. That test didn't actually pass. The way I can tell is by just running the test from the command line. So if I go vendor bin codesep run, there are actually 2 failures. One is I can't see that the role passenger is in the response. And here, I can't see that both roles are also in a response in the later test. So that was me trying to troubleshoot this. So yeah, this test fails, and it's normal because if I look at my user DTO, I currently don't pass the roles currently assigned to the user, but that's fine. I'm going to augment the user DTO to support that. So I'm going to go back to my app user entity. In my toDTO method, I'm going to pass this roles to array, and then I'm going to go here. I'm going to say array roles, and I'm going to initialize the field. So now the roles array should be present in the response. So let's run the code section again from the command line. And yes, okay, so now all the tests pass. Yep. All right, so now that we can create a user and assign one or multiple roles to the user, we want to be able to create a location. In our tests here, we're going to create a new concept called location. So new directory location. Now do no plus. Okay, so I'm going to paste some constants here. Just kind of latitude and longitude. And then location repository new location repository, to which I'm going to pass the entity manager. Now I'm going to say location info. So for this one, actually, I'm going to be more creative. I'm going to leave it up to the repository. Because locations are only ever going to be looked up, not by ID, but by their latitude and longitude. So basically, when a location arrives into our system and we haven't seen and we haven't already stored that latitude and longitude pair, it's going to create the record and return it. But if it does exist, then it's going to just return the record. Okay, so I will still create a lookup location object. And then I just want to assert true that retrieve location is same as lookup location. In other words, the retrieve location has the same coordinates as the lookup location. Derp. Okay. Sure. Move it to the right. The namespace is wrong. It's at bundle repository, in which case I just need to import it here. And I'm going to create my entity here under source bundle entity. Again, namespace entity. Just going to import it here. So my tests are still going to fail for several reasons. Main one being is saying that does not exist, or get a create location. return this em create query. This time we're going to set two parameters. Set parameter lat to lat. Set parameter long to long. Get single result. So this one's going to be interesting, but for now we're going to keep it this way. But select L from me app location L where L dot lat equals lat L dot long equals long. These should have ordered by L dot created descending. Yeah, these should have a created field. No, it does not exist. So these coordinates don't exist in the system, so that's going to throw an error. Oh, first I need to make my location an entity. So entity table name equals locations. I'm going to give this an ID, but it's going to be like a video ID. So this one, I need to name it longitude, and not long as far as the actual database table, database column name, because long is a reserved word. And it's funny because it doesn't bug in SQLite, but it does bug in MySQL. So that's a lesson learned there. Don't name your columns LONG, because that's a reserved word. Okay, but from an entity standpoint, the property long. Okay, so now run my test. Oh, I do need a created field. There's a time zone safe way to do this. We'll just leave it at that for now. So no result was found. That's good. That's exactly what I wanted. What I'm going to do is wrap this actually in a try catch. So it wasn't found, then I'm going to create it. Equals new app location lat long. And then I could pretty much let's say location, new location, and return So basically, if it exists, I'm going to return. If it does not exist, an exception is going to get thrown, at which point I'm going to create a new application and I'm going to save it. And then I'm going to try to return it again using the same line long. Because I just saved it, now it should exist. So now this query should return something. So that's kind of how I'm going about it. Yeah, I just don't need to have that, the if I just extend amp repository, I don't need to reinvent the constructor. Okay, so let's see if we can get this test to pass here. What? Oh. Yeah. Okay, so that's good. Now I just need to create this method. Now I've got the location handle at the repository level. Okay, so now that we can create or get location at the repository level, now we're going to do it at the service level. So we'll just do a new PHP class, location service at extends app test case. So do some refactoring here. These constants, I'm just going to move them to the base test class. Okay, that's good. Okay, so source service right here. It's an app bundle service. Okay. I can import it. Okay, so now it should fail here. Get location, yep, it fails. I'm going to create this. I'll just do return this location repository, get or create location based on that, and launch. So that's going to return application. So now we can get a location on the service layer. That's pretty good. Now that we can get the location of the service, it means that we have a way to get, so from our service layer right now, we are able to get a user, assign a passenger role to the user, for example, and then we can get a location. Now we have what we need to create a ride, the concept of a ride, because a ride to exist, it's going to need at least a passenger and a departure location. All right, so we know how to make a passenger, and we know how to make a location, a departure location. Let's go up to our acceptance layer, all the way up to here. Allows me to get a passenger. So I'm going to refactor it. But this is going to be this I get new passenger. And I'm going to take this method here, cut it, and I'm going to go into support API tester, and I'm going to augment this with protected. This. So include section, that's basically how you augment your vocabulary. Member has predicted class has magic method call. Oh, it should be public. Yeah, okay. Let's try this again. Okay, test all pass. I'm gonna create a new class called I get new passenger. So get new passenger returns the user ID. Basically, I want to do a send. No, it's an I send post API request to an endpoint that would be ride, and then the payload will be passenger ID, create a passenger ID, and then departure latitude would be that's one way to do it. So the response should return something about the ride. I will almost just kind of do this. Okay, so that's the, oops, sorry, that was a test suite. If I run my test, my conception tests, they're going to fail now because none of this exists. So we're going to leave this alone for now. And now we're going to dive down to the repository layer. All right, so let's jump down to the repository layer to create a new ride. So I'm going to create a new folder called ride. And in there, I'm going to create a new class, ride repository test. I'm going to extend test case. So I'm going to need a passenger. I'm also going to need a departure location. these things need to exist in the database before I can do anything with a ride. But basically what I'll do is new ride equals new ride, to which I will pass the passenger and the departure location. So a ride cannot exist unless there is a passenger departure associated with it. Okay, so to get these things to exist in the database, I'm going to do some refactoring from stuff that I've done before. In user repository test, I'm going to move the user repo setup, the parent class. Protected. So I can remove this to do because that was done. So now my test will pass. I'm going to comment this out for now. Okay. User repository test. My get repo new user, I'm also going to move this. To the parent class. Do my test still pass? Yes, they do. So I'm going to make save user. So it already returns. So that's good. I'm going to refactor that to get repo new passenger. And I'm going to move that to the parent class. Does it spark joy? Yeah, that's good. Okay, so now I have a convenient way to get a passenger from the base test class. Now we're going to look at our location friend, location repository test. I can pretty much move this to a field. And I'll just put that in the parent class as well. And I'll just add field. Okay, so now at least it's there. I'll go back to my protected. Okay, do my test still pass? Okay, refactor a bit, run the test, things are okay. I'm going to say this is get home location. And I'll move that to the parent class. Do my test still pass? Okay, everything's fine. Okay, so now I can get my home location and I can get a passenger. So if I go back to my ride repository test, I can say that passenger equals this get repo new passenger. This get home location. So departure is home. So now things become a little bit more interesting. So I'll have a ride repository equals new ride repository, to which I'm going to pass the entity manager. So, and then I'll just say repository, save ride, save ride. And then I'll say retrieved ride equals ride repository by ID, new ride, assert true that retrieve ride is and then I'll say assert true retrieve ride is destined for departure location, and then assert true retrieve ride is ridden by passenger friend. Let's make this happen. Source entity. Okay. This is add bundle entity. Okay. I'm going to initialize the fields. Good. I'm going to import. So my ride is going to have a UUID, which I'm going to create from that. You know what? It should have a created field as well. So obviously this is going to be an entity, so I might as well just kind of bootstrap this right now. It's going to be table name equals rides. It's going to be an add entity. So not all of my fields have annotations, so Doctrine will know what to do with them. Okay, so I can run the test right now. It's not going to be super useful, but on this. Yep, alright, so let's create a ride repository into the repository folder, open, add, and it's going to be app bundle repository. And now I always do this. All I need to do is extend app repository. Get rid of this, and I just need to import it. Okay. So now I'm going to create a save ride method. Pretty much just say this save new ride. Call it a day. Alright, so new ride means a get ID method, so let's just slap that now. That's going to return a UUID, and it's going to return this ID. Okay, so now we'll get that, and now we can create this. Return this en create query. So we're going to set parameter. It's not a user ID, it's a ride ID. Jeebus. Okay. Get single result, which is going to return the ride, but it's going to throw an exception. Okay. So it's going to be select R from E, ride R, where R.ID equals the path ID. We should be able to go all the way up to this line and see what it does. So now let's do this method. So this is ride to test. So return ride to test ID. This ID. Because again, we're using UUIDs. So UUID has this equals method that can compare them. Okay. So we passed all the way here. So now what I'm going to do is test in. So function to compare. Return this departure location is same as location to compare. I should be close enough. Now let's do is written by. Return this passenger is user to compare. Ah, look at that. All right, so now that we can create a new ride and the repository layer, we get it done in the service layer. Ride service test extends active case. So I'm going to do some refactoring. This guy, for example, we're going to extract it to a field, and then I'm going to move that to the parent class, protected field. So I'll do it here. Okay. And protected. Can get rid of this. So I'm going to do user service, no, write service. Write service equals new write service. To which I'm going to pass write repository. I want to say write service new ride. To which I'm going to pass a passenger. Yeah, because I want to do it by search true new ride is destined for destination. Assert true new ride is ridden by passenger. Okay. I can run the test. It's going to fail. We have syntax error here. Okay. No. So, okay. Let's create write service. We're going to put it in the source directory. Let's move that to the right. Let's fix its up bundle. So I'm going to create this method. New ride to which I pass the passenger. Ooh, what did I do here? It's destination. Jeebus. Okay. They should pass. But I also want to say retrieved ride equals ride service by ID of new get ID. So it's going to fail. And I really won't be testing retrieve ride. Assert true. Retrieve ride is overkill. Create that. Return a ride. Return this ride repository by ID of ride ID. Okay, so now that we can get a ride from the service layer, let's go back up. So remember our create ride test, where we're going to send a API request to a ride endpoint. We're going to pass it a passenger ID and then departure latitude and departure longitude. So let's create a ride controller class. So it's going to extend app controller. Just so I can use this one as a reference. Let me put it here. I'm going to put these use statements here. Public function new ride. Request. And it's going to return I look at my test here, I'm going to pass passenger ID. So passenger equals this user, this ID of request get passenger ID. Okay, and then departure is going to be this location. So I'm going to create a convenience method called location to retrieve the location service. Protected function location, which is return a location service, and it's going to return new location service, to which I'm going to pass a new location repository, to which I'm going to pass the entity manager. Okay, so now I can go back to my right controller. I can say location, get location, and then I can say request get departure alert, and then request departure application takes floats. Gotta make sure that the service is using floats. Float. That's not good. That's not bueno. That is not good. Yeah, float, float. Can't switch my unit test up fast. Okay, so let's go back to right controller, passenger, departure, and my right service. Yeah, this was not destination, it's departure. Jesus. So return. Alright, so I'm going to say, I'm going to make another convenience method into app controller called ride. Protected function ride. Ride service. Return a new ride service, to which I'm going to pass a new ride repository, and then entity manager. Return this ride, new ride of passenger, and departure to DTO. Let's make this DTO method. Return new ride DTO, to which I'm going to pass this passenger get ID to string, this departure location, yeah, I'll have to create those methods. I hate to expose property, but sometimes you kind of have to do it. I go back to my right controller, right DTO, it's app bundle DTO. So now if I go back to my right entity, import class, right controller. Alright, so I'm about ready to run my acceptance test. So things are going to fail, but so at least in the controller, things look pretty well bootstrapped. And yet, our test is going to fail, and you probably guessed why. Because we don't have no database tables. Okay, so I get a 500 error. So if I go back to here, an exception occurred while executing this base table view not found table since only location does not exist. All right, so we've introduced the concept of location, but we don't have a database table for it, and we introduced the concept of write, and we don't have a database table for it. But fret not, this is where our old friend doctrine can help us. So console doctrine migrations diff. Okay, it created the migration file. So now I can go to it. I can add it to my source control, and you can see it creates a table and it creates all the things you need. So now, will it work? Vendor bin concept run. Oh no! So now that I've done a diff, I gotta do migrations. Migrate. There you go. You just run the migration. So now if I go back to my SQL Pro and I reload, I can see that I have my rides table and I have my locations table. Alright, so now let's concept run. Aha! I have a mismatch here because fields are named slightly differently. Okay, so let's look at my ride DTO friend. Departure lat. This is departure log. Somehow it added an underscore ID. Oh, that sucks. Let's write it again for giggles. Oops, I got 500. Right, ETO lat does not exist. Okay, so that's more interesting error. Okay. If it really wants to name the property passenger underscore ID when it converts to JSON, I don't care. So I'm going to change my test here to say I'm expecting an object that says passenger underscore ID. And I'm going to run the test. Oh, I see. It puts underscores everywhere. Okay, fine. That's what you want to do. That's what you're going to get. Okay, let's try this again. Hey, all right. So now we can create a ride with a passenger, departure latitude and departure longitude. So now that we can create a new ride with a passenger and a destination, I want to be able to assign a driver to a ride. So first, let's find a way to get a driver. So I'm going to refactor this. So then, now that I refactored it, I can do public function, get new driver, and first equals Joe driver, last equals Joe back, and then role equals @role driver name. So if I go back to created driver ID equals I get new driver. So created ride ID equals created ride of ID. So we'll have to make sure that our DTO guy returns a property called ID. That's the right ID. In fact, I'm going to do that now. And then what I can do is send patch API request to an endpoint of ride created ride ID, to which I'm going to pass an associative array. That's going to say that's about it. Okay, so it just dawned on me that the method that I called is destined for on my ride entity, right? It's the wrong name for this method. I'm comparing the departure location. So what I really want to name this is leaving from. There we go. So I just renamed that method. No big deal, but now it's kind of less confusing when I go to my repository test. That'll say is leaving from. Okay. So I've made a small acceptance test. I also want to say, so now I want to see a driver ID property. Create a driver ID. Okay, so that should be my acceptance test. All right, so let's go down to the repository layer. Ride repository test. Test assign driver to ride. Get rid of this. Okay, so now that I have a ride with passenger, I want to say it's really a ride with passenger and destination. Assign driver. Get repo new passenger. I'm going to do protected function. Get repo new driver. Pass app user. Okay, so now I know how to make a driver. No. Ride repository. Save ride. driver is going to be similar to passenger. Except that it's going to be driver ID. Return this driver is alright, passes. Okay, so now let's make sure we can assign a driver to a ride from the service layer. So let's go back to ride service test. I'm going to refactor this into a field. Remove it. We're going to move that to the parent class. Protected. Okay, we're good. So we'll just say this ride service assign driver to ride, to which I'm going to pass and then I can just retrieve the ride service by ID. Okay, so assign driver to ride, to which I pass a ride, and then my reporting driver, and then assert true. Retrieve ride is driven by driver. Okay, so this test is going to fail because assign driver to ride doesn't exist. Make it happen. So I'll say ride assign driver this ride repository. Save ride. Yeah, I should do it. Right. It's a right that's being returned. I mean, I'm basically not looking at the return value for this yet, but it will become useful later. Okay, so now that we know how to assign a driver to a ride as a service layer, let's do it at the controller. So if we go back to our acceptance test, this one here, where we did we're doing like a send patch API request so that we can set a driver ID. Okay, so I'm going to rerun those tests so you can see that they fail. So my acceptance test should fail because the endpoint doesn't exist. user driver ID doesn't exist. I mean, I might as well create the doctrine diff right now. Bin console doctrine migrations diff. So now if I look at it here, there we go. So it creates a table of rides. It alters rides and it adds a driver ID column. So then I'm going to do doctrine migrations migrate. Okay. So now if I run my test, they should fail for different reasons, being that the endpoint doesn't exist. Here we go, 404. Right, because we're trying to send a patch request to this ride ID, but I don't have a patch request for it yet. So I'm going to go to my ride controller. I'll just say pup patch ride string ride ID request. Okay, and it's going to return a ride DTO as well. I got to add the mapping here. So it's at rest patch and /API v1 ride, and then it's like curly brace ride ID. So this variable is going to go in here. Okay, so then I can say ride to patch equals this ride by ID of this ID of ride ID. No. And then at the same time in the request, I have the driver, right? So driver to assign to ride equals this user service by ID of this ID of this request get. And it's literally called driver ID. So the driver to assign to ride will be obtained by calling the by ID method on the user service to retrieve the driver by ID. So now that I have these two things, I should be able to call return this ride assign driver to ride, to which I pass the ride to patch and the driver to assign to the ride, and then I return my TDD method. Now note that my response expects a driver ID property. So let's run the test. Let's be thorough here. It wants the driver ID property. Okay. Otherwise, we're pretty close. So this driver get ID to string. It's going to be string that might do it. Who knows? So I'm calling get ID on null. Oh, that's because the first time that I call it, I don't have a driver assigned to it. So this is not exactly pretty. What's the syntax? Like that. Okay, alright, it passes. Now that we can assign a driver to a ride, we'll want to add a destination to it. So I send patch API request to the same endpoint. So it's going to be ride create ride ID, and then a property called destination lat location repository test work location lat, and then destination long location repository test work location longitude. Okay. Once I've done that, I'll just say IC response contains JSON. So basically, I'm going to return the ride after I've patched it, just like I did earlier. And so now I could even say I should have the ID in there, the ride ID as well. Create ride ID. So now we're going to check for what we just added. So it's going to be destination underscore lat, which should have the value of thank goodness for typo check. And destination long. Okay, so that's my acceptance test. I'm going to run it. Obviously, it's going to fail because I don't know what to do right now with the destination. But always good to verify that test fails. Code set run. Had the URI wrong. It's also important to verify that it fails for the right reason, right? So I had forgotten the slash here. So let's try that again. Okay, and I got a 500. My ride ID should not be null. So the ride ID is being set. So ride controller line 50, okay? Right, that's because I'm not passing a driver ID. So this is basically a different patch request, right? I'm not passing a driver ID. I'm just gonna have to have some logic here that says, hey, if this key was passed, then do this logic. Otherwise, if these things were sent, then do another logic. Okay, so at least my test is failing for a right reason because of code that I've not yet implemented. All right, so now that we have the acceptance test, we're going to test drive the logic at the unit level. Test assign destination to ride. So what I'm going to do here is move this a little up, and then I'm going to stash that into a method called get repo new ride with passenger, departure, and driver. So then I can reuse this. Now I want to be able to say ride assign destination of this. Alright, so I have a way to get a home location, but I want my destination to be a work location, so I'm gonna it's going to be get work location. It's going to be work location lat. Work location long. Make this a bit less wordy. Red, green refactor. Always good to refactor. Get rid of code you don't need. Consolidate things. Okay, so now if I go back to my test, now I can say get work location. Oops. So once I have assigned a destination to a ride entity, now I want to save it again to the database, right? So I'm going to go ride repository, save ride, and then I want to make sure that things are still good, so I'll do retrieve ride equals this ride repository by ID, ride ID, and I can just say assert true that the retrieved ride is destined for, this time that's the method we want, is this destined for, I'm literally going to do a new app location repository test, work location lab, location repository test, work location long. Obviously the test is going to fail here because the signed destination does not exist, but let's run it anyway. Oh, sorry, that was my refactoring earlier that kind of messed that up. Okay. All right. So now it fails for the right reason. So let's make this method exist. Let me just move this up to the other. Oh, that's right. Here I'll say this destination, which is a property that does not yet exist, equals destination. And then I'll just kind of add the field as an application. But this one I'm going to move it close to the other one. This is departure, so I'm just going to move it close to departure. So I get departure and destination. I guess it should be called destination. Location needs to be consistent. All right, and that'll be pretty much the same ORM mapping, but this time instead of departure ID, it's going to be destination ID. All right, so it should be good. Assign destination. So we're in business here. So if I run the test, now it should tell is destined for. So I'm going to add the method location to compare, and then we'll just say return location to compare is same as this destination location. All right, so now that we can do it we can assign a destination to a ride at the repository layer. Let's do it at the service layer. So I'll go back to my ride service test. And I'll do test assign destination to ride. So I'll do some refactoring here, kind of similar to what we did in the repo, but service, new ride with passenger, departure, and driver. And so I'm going to reuse this here, and it's going to be simpler because I don't need to test on the driver. There we go. This ride service assign destination to ride, to which I'm going to pass my ride. And this get work location. And then retrieved ride, this ride service by ID ride get ID. And then I just want to say assert true that retrieved ride is destined for greatness. New application, location repository test, work location lat, location repository test, work location long. So this test is going to fail because this method does not exist. So let us make it exist. Ride, and that's called a destination. So here I can do ride, assign destination of the past destination, and I can call my ride repository and say save ride. Ride. Actually returns ride. Okay. So back to ride service test. Assign destination to ride. Now it exists, and I basically call the assign destination on the ride entity, and I pass it the destination, and then I just save the ride entity, and I return it because I'm going to need it on the controller to output it. Does my test pass? Yeah, all the tests do pass. Okay, so now that we can assign a destination to the ride as a service layer, let's go back to the controller. And to do that, we're going to go back to our acceptance test. So remember that I sent a patch API request to the ride where I give it a destination latitude and a destination longitude. So it's a different patch request from another patch request, right? So in some cases, I can have a patch request coming in with just a driver ID, or I can have a patch request coming in with a destination latitude and longitude pair. And both of those could come independently, or they could come at the same time. So it should not be an else-if kind of situation. It should be more of an if and if situation. Let's go back to the ride controller. So this is the part that I like the least because I'm really starting to put some logic in my controller, which I hate doing. If you look at the master branch, I have a version of this where it's I actually create a ride transition service, which kind of encapsulates these kind of state changes. But anyway, for now, I'm just going to do it in the controller. First thing I want to do is, I want to verify that my test fails, right? So, we did that earlier, but there we go. And we get a 500 because if you remember, actually now this is, yes, another error because we've introduced the concept of a destination ID in the entity. So now might be a good time to do our doctrine diff magic. So let's do that. Bin console doctrine migration diff. Okay. So it created this file, and then all right, I'm going to add it to my source control. Boom. There you go. So it adds the column destination ID, and it creates the proper foreign keys and everything. So now that I've generated my migration file, I'm just going to do migrations, migrate. Yes. Ta-da. Okay. So now if I run my test again, go to run, and we look at the 500 error that we just got, I think it should be the same one we got earlier. Yes. The ID must be of type string, null given. And again, that's because in ride controller, so I'm basically sending this patch API request, which only has destination latitude and longitude, but it does not have the driver ID, which I'm expecting here, right? This is why I need to do some logic. Let's start. I'll do if zip request get of driver ID. So I'll say if not, I hate doing things like that, but if not is null, this, then I'll do this. So if not is null of that, then do this. So then it's going to be painful. But, well. So if not is null of destination lat and not is null of destination long, return this ride, assign destination to ride, to which I'm going to pass the ride to patch and a brand new application. Let me just do this. Let's refactor a little bit. Driver ID. This is going to be destination new application of destination lat, destination long, and go to DTO. Alright, so let's see if the test pass. It should still fail because I'm not echoing this. So now I should complain that I got a mismatch on the output. No, I got a 500. What does it mean? Okay, so, oh, right. Yeah, my location has to come from somewhere. Yeah, I just need to do a get location. Because I created a new entity, and the new entity is going to be assigned to the ride, which is, it has to come from somewhere. I can use my service, my location service. Oh, this location service, get location, to which I can pass it any latitude and longitude. So now let's see if my test fails for what I wanted to fail. Yes, all right. Now I just need to add my destination latitude and longitude to my ride DTO. So let's do that. So let's go to my ride entity. Yeah, this is going to be fun. So it's going to be a similar situation here where destination lat equals is not is null of this. You know, I'll do this. Destination lat is null. Destination equals null. If not is null of this destination location, then destination lat equals this destination location get lat, and destination long equals this destination location get long. Okay. Yeah, I'm not too crazy about this either, but oh well. So then I can just pass it to my DTO, destination lat and destination long. And I can go back to my DTO here. And then I'm going to make it a nullable float destination lat nullable float destination long, and initialize fields. Let's run the test. Yeah. Okay, and here I can look at my database, my local database here, and you can see all the things that have been created, right? Every time I've run a test, it's created rides. So now my rides table has ID created, passenger ID, departure ID, driver ID, destination ID. All right, so from the earlier test runs, destination ID did not exist. And that's why a lot of these columns are null. You know, I get my users here, and then here I have my users roles assignment. Boom, good times. Here are my roles. And here are all the locations. I only have two locations, right? Work, home, and work. So that does it.